Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a place where the air shimmers with dry heat, the sky stretches cloudless and endless, and the very idea of a cold drink sounds like fantasy. You're wandering across the sun-baked plateau of ancient Persia, somewhere between dusty caravanserais and rose-filled gardens, and it's hot, really hot. The kind of heat that makes your sandals stick to the ground and your thoughts slow to a sluggish crawl. And yet, as impossible as it sounds, people here once chilled their drinks. Without freezers. Without electricity. Without even a cube of ice in sight, at least most of the year. You probably wouldn't survive this climate in a hoodie and jeans. But the ancient Persians? They thrived here, sun and all. And they managed to turn their thirst into innovation. What we're diving into tonight isn't some flashy war story or royal scandal, it's the gentle, methodical brilliance behind one of the earliest systems of refrigeration the world has ever known. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Drop it in the comments. It's always cool to see how far this sleepy little history club reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your walk somewhere near the old city of Yazd, the horizon painted in sun-bleached browns and dust-pink shadows. The heat presses down like a heavy wool blanket, and everything seems to shimmer. People in light linen robes pass by, fanning themselves with palm leaves, moving slowly but purposefully. Somehow, despite the blazing sun, life moves with a kind of grace here. You wander past a small shaded courtyard where a man in a turban slowly sips a glowing red drink, cold, somehow, despite the midday blaze. It's not magic. It's just ancient Persian science. They say necessity is the mother of invention. When you're living in a place where the summer heat often climbs above 100 degrees Fahrenheit and the nearest glacier is a distant dream, you either figure out how to stay cool, or you sweat forever. And the Persians? They chose option 1. Their first trick? Think like the earth. The ground, after all, is cooler beneath the surface. If you dig down far enough, it's like peeling off the layers of heat. At just the right depth, you'll find soil that never quite heats up in summer, never quite freezes in winter. So you dig. And dig. And build downward. These weren't just holes in the ground, they were part of an intricate system of underground spaces, channels, and air shafts that worked together like a giant clay thermos. You wipe a bit of imaginary sweat from your brow and pause beside one of these early structures. It looks simple from above, just a rounded mound with a small dome. But as you duck inside, the temperature shifts. It's instantly cooler. Your sandals tap against clay as you descend a gentle slope. The air is dry but still, like the inside of a quiet museum. You've just stepped into an early prototype of what would later evolve into the yakshal, a word that literally means ice pit. But more on those in a bit. What's remarkable is that these early cooling pits weren't just functional, they were elegant. The walls were often plastered with a special mix of clay, sand, and egg whites, designed to insulate and repel heat. Historians still argue whether the exact composition changed depending on region or builder, but the principle stayed the same, coolness trapped and held like a secret. You run your fingers along the wall. It feels faintly damp, as if it remembers the cold. Above, small vents allow hot air to rise and escape, like natural chimneys. And while the air is still, it doesn't feel stale. That's the genius of the design. Everything here, from the slope of the tunnel to the angle of the vents, was calculated. And yet, no computers, no blueprints. Just centuries of observation, refinement, and maybe a few trial and error moments involving spoiled dates and sweaty complaints. Outside again, the sun feels more aggressive than ever. You can almost hear it buzzing, like an old fluorescent light. But now you know, the ancient Persians weren't helpless against this heat. They were in conversation with it. Studying it. Bending it gently to their will. One of the earliest references to Persian cooling methods comes from ancient Greek writers. Xenophon, a student of Socrates, wrote about ice being stored in Persia even in summer. He didn't quite understand how they managed it, but he was impressed. And honestly, so are you. Because as you keep walking, imagining the layers beneath your feet, earth, chamber, air, you realize, this isn't just architecture. It's survival art. Oh, and if you're thinking this sounds eerily similar to a wine cellar, you're not wrong. Except these ancient cooling systems were multi-use. Not just for grapes. Water. Milk. Syrups. Even medicines. All kept cool without a single watt of electricity. As the evening light fades into a peach-colored glow, you notice more of these dome-like structures dotting the landscape. Some are still in use, others are ruins overtaken by sand and time. But they all whisper the same thing: coolness was never an accident here. It was a quiet, deliberate triumph. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow you'll learn how they went one step further. Not just keeping things cool, but actually making and storing ice. In the desert. But for now, you keep walking. One breeze-caught robe at a time. Slowly, softly. The sun dipping lower. And in the back of your mind, you carry a single, comforting thought: people have been beating the heat for thousands of years. And they didn't need a fridge to do it. You wake, or maybe you never quite fell asleep, in the cool hush of early morning. The stars have only just begun to fade, and the world around you feels suspended in that in-between hour where the heat hasn't yet stirred. A few merchants are already up, yawning over clay cups of tea, but the air is still soft, like a silk scarf brushing across your skin. You find yourself near the edge of a town. Not a sprawling metropolis, but a modest settlement huddled close to the base of a hill. And rising ahead of you is a strange, almost otherworldly structure, a large, conical dome made of mud bricks, pale and slightly crumbly with age. This, you learn, is no temple or granary. This is a yakshal. Literally, ice pit, yes, but calling it that is like calling a library a book closet. What you're staring at is the centerpiece of one of the most ingenious passive cooling systems ever built. You circle around it slowly, your sandals crunching softly on packed earth. It stands tall, often over 60 feet high, and its curved silhouette casts a long, sleepy shadow across the ground. The shape isn't arbitrary. That dome, with its convex geometry, isn't just there to look a bit mysterious. It's aerodynamic. Heat rises, and the dome's curve guides it upward and out, leaving the air below refreshingly untouched. Inside, there's no roaring compressor, no hum of machinery. Instead, there's quiet. Thick walls made from a mixture of sand, clay, lime, and even goat hair insulate the contents. You duck inside, and the light dims. The air here feels ancient. Cool. Dry. Like stepping into a breath held for centuries. The chamber narrows as it descends, tapering down into a subterranean pit where the real magic happens. You peer over the edge, and you can just imagine blocks of ice sitting quietly below, stacked and stored, wrapped in straw or cloth. This is where winter's chill waited patiently for summer's thirst. You take a seat on a stone ledge inside the yakshal and let your imagination do the heavy lifting. So how did this architectural miracle work? Well, it started in winter. See, despite the desert's brutal daytime heat, Persian winters, especially at night, could be quite cold. Freezing, even. Particularly in cities like Yazd, Kerman, and Kashan, where elevation and latitude worked in favor of a would-be ice harvester. Water would be channeled into shallow pools next to the yakshal. These pools weren't just haphazard puddles, they were long, narrow trenches, often shaded on three sides by high walls to block the sun and amplify night cooling. At night, the temperature dropped drastically, and a thin layer of ice would form across the surface of the water. Workers, sometimes laborers, sometimes slaves, would rise before dawn to carefully break the ice into slabs and carry them into the yakshal's depths. This process repeated night after night, layering the ice like lasagna, until the storage pit was full. Now, if you're picturing people lugging around sleds or shovels, remember this: they didn't have stainless steel tools or waterproof gloves. Just thick cloths, baskets, and a lot of patience. Some accounts even suggest that people used frozen reeds as impromptu tongs. Delightfully primitive? Yes. Effective? Surprisingly so. Historians still debate exactly how efficient these early systems were. Some argue that the ice couldn't have lasted through the blazing summer months. Others believe the combination of insulation, shaded positioning, and clever air circulation made it entirely plausible. What we do know is that someone drank cold tamarind water in July, and it definitely wasn't the guy with an electric cooler strapped to his donkey. You picture a line of porters, their shoulders hunched against the cold of dawn, carefully stacking ice like treasure. Because in a way, that's exactly what it was. Not just for drinking, either. Ice was used to preserve food, to treat fevers, and to cool delicate medicines that couldn't survive a heat wave. And here's where things get weirder. There are ancient Persian records, scribbled in old Farsi scripts and occasionally recounted by traveling poets, that mention ice houses being guarded. Guarded, as in, stationed with people. Sometimes even armed people. Why? Because the contents were valuable. Especially in times of drought, ice could become a bargaining chip. Some cities even levied taxes on ice storage or claimed a royal share of the stash. You walk back up toward the dome's open vent, where a thin column of air seems to flow like smoke. It's not just about storing ice, it's about letting hot air escape. This venting system, a kind of ancient flue, worked alongside carefully placed wind catchers, which we'll get to soon, to maintain the chill. The architecture didn't fight nature, it flowed with it. As you stand in the middle of this mud and miracle dome, you hear a faint rustling. Just a lizard, skittering across the brick, but it feels like the yakshul is still alive. Watching. Remembering. You wonder how many summer feasts it quietly enabled. How many children gasped with delight at their first taste of cool pomegranate juice in August. How many healers thanked the gods for cold water on a fevered brow. You step back out into the morning, where the sun is beginning its climb and the air is warming. But you're a little wiser now. You've stood inside an ice machine built without wires, motors, or plastics. A monument to patience, observation, and mud brick geometry. Oh, and one more thing. Some of these yakshuls. They're still standing. A few even still work. You could visit one tomorrow if you really wanted. Though your chances of finding summer snowballs are, well, slim. But you could try. And as the sun finally crests the hills and spills its heat across the land, you can't help but smile. The ancient Persians didn't conquer nature. They studied it, partnered with it, and then chilled their drinks anyway. You're walking now, not hurried, just ambling, along a narrow path that winds through a quiet Persian village. The dust kicks softly under your sandals, the scent of dry herbs and sun-baked clay wafting lazily through the air. You pass a series of curious structures, each shaped like a tall fin or sail, rising from the rooftops like sleeping sea creatures. You pause. These are not chimneys. Not spires. They're badgers, the iconic wind catchers of ancient Persia. And this is where the plot thickens, or rather, cools. If the yakshul was the storage room, the badger was the air conditioner. But not the blasting, teeth-chattering kind. Think of it as a gentle exhale through stone lips. A sigh that says, "We figured this out long before your thermostat." You duck into a traditional home nestled behind a high wall. Inside, the temperature drops by several degrees. You can almost hear your sweat evaporate in gratitude. Light filters through latticed windows, dust motes dancing like tiny spirits. Above, towering over the courtyard, a badger looms. Four open sides, catching even the laziest breeze. Here's how it works, and brace yourself, because you're about to fall in love with geometry and air pressure. The wind enters the badger's openings and is funneled downward into the living quarters below. If there's no wind, no problem. The air inside the tower heats up from the sun and rises, drawing cooler air up from lower levels or underground channels called canons. More on those delightful subterranean mysteries later. Historians still argue whether badgers evolved independently in various cities or whether the knowledge spread from a single origin point, like a particularly well-ventilated rumor. What we do know is that this technology worked beautifully. Many Persian homes, palaces, and even water reservoirs were equipped with these tall, elegant towers. You walk deeper into the house. A low table waits, piled with apricots and fresh yogurt, and you find a spot on the floor cushions. There's a faint, delicious draft passing over your face, cool, dry, whisper light. This is not the blast of a fan or the chill of a refrigerated vent. This is a soft invitation to exist in comfort. The badger doesn't hum. It doesn't buzz. It breathes. A whisper of breeze through baked brick, drawn down past moistened cloths or small water pools to cool even more before slipping through the home. And the engineering isn't just vertical, it's smart. Some wind catchers had directional vanes, shutters, or internal baffles, allowing the homeowner to adjust airflow depending on the season, wind direction, or the unexpected arrival of nosy relatives. In Yazd, the city where these structures became architectural poetry, you might find dozens of badgers on a single skyline. Some are square. Others octagonal. A few are beautifully tiled, as if the wind needed a red carpet. They're not just functional, they're a form of social expression. A status symbol. A sign of a well-ventilated mind. And speaking of social expression, let's not forget how this ties back to those yakshals. In elite homes or wealthier merchant quarters, yakshals and badgers were often part of the same cooling system. The ice stored in the pit would help chill air pulled through underground channels, while the badger directed that cooled air upward into living spaces. You close your eyes for a moment. You're not in a museum. You're lying on a woven mat beneath one of these wind catchers, the soft clink of metal dishes and sleepy murmurs drifting in from the kitchen. The air shifts again, barely enough to stir a curtain, but enough to make you sigh involuntarily. In this moment, the genius of ancient Persian passive cooling becomes more than just an engineering marvel. It's a philosophy. Work with nature, not against it. Don't fight the heat, outsmart it. No fossil fuels. No electric bills. Just bricks, wind, and wisdom. And of course, it wasn't all serene breezes and architectural harmony. There were disagreements, even within families, about where to place the wind catchers, how many vents to allow, and whether to build one large tower or several small ones. Architects squabbled. Neighbors compared breezes. It said, probably half-jokingly, that in some districts, the wind catcher wars were more intense than local politics. There's even one rather amusing fringe theory that wind catchers were sometimes sabotaged, plugged with fabric or sealed with mud, during neighborhood feuds. Imagine your air being cut off by a spiteful cousin. But in the long run, the badger endured. It wasn't a fleeting trend. It was an enduring answer to a question that still haunts modern cities: how do you stay cool without destroying the planet? You sip a clay cup of pomegranate juice and gaze up at the ceiling. The badger stretches far above you, and through the slits in its upper vents, you glimpse the bluest sky. A hawk glides silently overhead. Below, a cat sleeps in the sun patch by the doorway, utterly unfazed by the world's rotation. And that's when you realize, you've experienced true luxury. Not in gold or silk, but in the gentle genius of a culture that saw wind not as a nuisance, but as a gift. You're standing now on the edge of a slope that dips toward a lush green oasis. It shouldn't be here. Nothing in this desert landscape makes you expect grapevines and cypress trees. But there it is, a ribbon of green wrapped around a murmuring stream that shouldn't exist. This, my friend, is where the canot comes in. You shift the pack on your shoulder and follow a faint dirt path that leads toward a curious stone mound with a hole in the center, like a chimney in reverse. You peer inside, and if your eyes adjust to the darkness, you might catch the glint of moving water below. And yes, you've just discovered one of the quietest, longest-running miracles of ancient Iranian engineering. A qanat, pronounced qanat, is an underground aqueduct, and it's one of the unsung heroes of Persian drink chilling and general staying aliveness. Thousands of years before bulldozers and PVC piping, Persians were boring gently sloping tunnels beneath the earth, tapping into highland aquifers and coaxing gravity to carry cool, clean water across miles of dry terrain to the valleys below. You walk along a series of these ventilation shafts, each spaced at intervals across the desert like evenly poked holes in a flute. These vertical wells weren't just for accessing the tunnel below, they let in air, served as maintenance portals, and offered a helpful visual map of where the channel lay. Now picture this, the Yakshul we explored earlier was often built near the mouth of a qanat. That water wasn't just for drinking, it helped chill the air. It flowed into shallow pools that cooled the environment. And in some cases, it directly aided ice production. Think of it like nature's co-op between geology, climate, and a particularly motivated team of diggers with extremely good calves. And yes, you can bet this required serious legwork. Digging a qanat meant starting at a source spring or water-rich mountain base and working downslope for sometimes dozens of kilometers, entirely underground. The slope had to be precise, too steep and the tunnel would collapse or flood, too flat and the water wouldn't move. Historians still argue whether the earliest qanats came from the Zagros foothills or whether desert communities around Yazd and Kerman pioneered their most effective designs. Either way, we're talking millennia-old tech that's still used in parts of Iran, Afghanistan, and North Africa today. That's not just longevity. That's architectural stubbornness at its finest. You crouch by one of the open shafts. Cool, dry air brushes your face, rising gently from below. Even on this scorched afternoon, the underground channel hums with quiet promise. The water it carries is cold. Not frigid. Not icy. But cold enough to soothe your hands, chill your clay flask of dates and lime juice, and yes, keep perishable goods cool. And here's your quirky tidbit of the day, in some villages, qanats had their own little bureaucracies. Water rights were meticulously assigned, and each family got a measured slice of flow time per day, tracked not by clocks but by water clocks, clepsydras, or even the length of a burning incense stick. You didn't just have water, you had your turn. Imagine the gossip, Fatme got 20 extra minutes this week because her cousin's uncle's goat died and the magistrate felt bad. It's hard to get mad when it's also just, weirdly adorable. You follow the qanat now into the fields. It peaks above ground just briefly, known as a carise in this exposed state, where it trickles through irrigation channels that make orchards bloom in places where rain only shows up out of politeness once or twice a year. And it wasn't just agriculture. Qanats cooled public bathhouses. They fed garden fountains. They powered simple mills. In some towns, their tunnels were tall enough for a person to walk inside, often barefoot and half-crouched, but still walking. You're glad you're wearing loose trousers and have good knees, because you're about to do exactly that. The temperature drops a good 10 degrees as you step into the tunnel. The walls are made of earth and brick, and the ceiling just barely arches above your head. You hear the hush of moving water beside you, see your breath for the first time today, and realize, this is natural refrigeration. A passage carved in dry silence that delivers coldness, drop by drop, to the heart of a thirsty city. Some qanats were lined with ceramic or stone. Others left bare. A few even passed under cemeteries. Cue debates over spiritual cleansing or spooky drainage issues, depending on whom you asked. And there were, as always, disagreements. How wide should the tunnel be? How deep the shafts? How often should they be cleaned? Spoiler, not often enough, according to the apprentices. And let's not forget the builders. Called mukanis, these were skilled, almost priest-like diggers who read the land like a poem. They had to feel gradients in their bones, gauge soil moisture by touch, and keep precise mental maps of entire systems. Today, we'd call that data visualization. Back then, it was just a guy squinting at a rock and muttering about clay density. You emerge from the tunnel back into daylight, blinking and refreshed. The air smells cleaner. A lizard skitters by, unimpressed. You take a swig from your flask, cool, sweet, exactly what you need. And all of this, you realize, flowed beneath your feet, invisibly and reliably. No electricity. No concrete mixers. Just math, mud, and more patience than a cat waiting by a mouse hole. So the next time you crack open a soda from your refrigerator, take a moment to appreciate the cannet. Because 2,500 years ago, someone figured out how to deliver chilled water across a desert, without a pump, without a pipe, and without once yelling, "Did someone unplug the fridge?" You pause in the shadow of a low mud brick wall, listening to the faint burble of flowing water behind you. Not bad, you think, for a civilization that did all this without Wi-Fi, GPS, or even a decent spreadsheet. But now, let's get a little more personal, because chilling your drink wasn't always just about digging a massive tunnel system. Sometimes, it started right at home. Picture this, it's the early hours of a summer morning in ancient Yazd. The sky is just beginning to bruise from indigo to gold. You, an unusually tall and probably slightly groggy Persian, shuffle into your family's courtyard, where rows of large ceramic jars, zayers or kums, line the stone floor. You tap one gently. Hollow. Another, cool to the touch. Bingo. You lift the heavy lid, and inside, water, cool from the night air, maybe flavored with a twist of dried lime, a petal or two of rose, or just the earthy mineral taste of the jar itself. No fancy carbonation. No plastic. Just cold hydration with a splash of pottery. These jars were often made from a porous clay blend, and that's where the magic begins. Through a process so simple it's practically smug, these vessels used evaporative cooling to chill their contents. As water slowly seeped through the walls of the jar and evaporated into the dry desert air, it carried heat away from the remaining liquid inside. Result? A cool, crisp sip of water, even without ice. Now, let's not get too smug ourselves. Historians still argue whether this method originated independently in multiple regions or if the knowledge drifted in along with early trade caravans. But what we do know is that from Iran to Egypt to India, this idea of porous pottery as refrigeration took hold fast and stayed for centuries. In fact, it's still used today in rural areas around the world. No charger required. You run your fingers along the jar's side. The outside feels damp. The inside, deliciously cold. A clever bit of science hidden in plain sight. Even better. Some jars were stored in semi-subterranean nooks along the shaded side of the courtyard, or under stone benches, or in little alcoves that caught the breeze funneled in by, you guessed it, the nearby badger, or wind catcher tower. Let's talk about those for a second. The wind catcher is one of those architectural things you'd expect to find on some hip sustainable design blog today, except the Persians were building them over 1,000 years ago. They rise from rooftops like tall chimneys, but instead of venting smoke, they pull air downward. The principle is simple: hot air rises, cool air sinks, and when you catch a breeze just right, you can circulate it into your living space, your basement, even over a jar of grape syrup you're hoping to preserve. And of course, when you combine these technologies, say, a wind catcher directing airflow down into a Yakshul chamber cooled by cannet-fed water and dotted with rows of evaporative clay jars, you're basically sitting in the ancient version of a deluxe walk-in fridge. The kind of place where even a king would say, "Ah, now this is living." And here's your fun fringe tidbit: some jars weren't just filled with water. No, ambitious households sometimes stored sharbat, a syrupy concentrate made of fruits, herbs, and sugar, ready to be mixed with cold water at a moment's notice. Think of it as ancient Persian Kool-Aid, only without the neon food dye. Popular flavors included sour cherry, quince, cucumber, and even vinegar and honey combos for the more adventurous palates. But if you really wanted to flex, you'd serve your guests chilled rosewater or saffron tea. Yes, cold tea. Some poets swore it was the only way to drink during long, torpid afternoons when even the flies refused to buzz. Add a silver cup, maybe a date or two for good measure, and voila, you're the toast of the quarter. You take a seat now on a worn stone bench, holding a shallow ceramic bowl of this makeshift sharbat. The clay's cool. The drink's sweeter than expected. And as the early light creeps across the courtyard tiles, you feel, oddly proud. Not of yourself, perhaps, you mostly watched, but of the sheer creativity that went into these everyday comforts. Because here's the thing, chilling drinks in ancient Persia wasn't just about utility. It was a gesture. A kind of hospitality. Cold water wasn't always easy to come by, and offering it to a visitor, especially in summer, was an act of welcome. A small luxury that said, I see you. And I value your thirst. Even today, in traditional Persian culture, you'll often find a brass or clay water pitcher set by the front door, waiting for visitors, travelers, or even the odd delivery person. It's not a new trend. It's a long memory. And in some rural villages, those traditions persist, down to the shape of the jars, the timing of the refills, and the quiet satisfaction of a clay vessel doing its job. So, next time you sip something icy from your high-tech fridge and think, I could never live without this, remember the Zaire. Humble, handmade, and absurdly effective. No humming motor. No digital thermometer. Just a clever design that outsmarts the sun with a wink and a whisper. You wander now beyond the courtyards, beyond the cool shadows of jars and breezy archways. The sun has begun its lazy climb, and the city stirs with a kind of practiced ease, vendors rolling up canvas shades, donkeys clopping down alleyways, someone brushing fresh mint off a cart with a palm frond. You turn toward the outskirts, where one of the more curious Persian marvels waits, a structure that resembles a sunken dome or half-buried spaceship. This, dear sleepy traveler, is a yakshal. The name literally means ice pit, and frankly, that's one of the most straightforward things you'll find in Persian architecture. Standing here, you're face to face with ancient refrigeration on a truly dramatic scale. These domed structures, built from a special heat-resistant mortar called saruj, made of clay, ash, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and a few things best not pondered before bed, were masterpieces of passive cooling. Thick walls, some over 2 meters thick, kept the searing summer heat at bay. But you already know that part. We teased it back in section 3. Now it's time to really understand how these things worked, not just in function, but in feeling. You duck through a narrow passage into the dim interior of the yakshal. The air shifts, suddenly cooler, damp, echoing with the faintest sound of dripping water. The silence wraps around you like linen. Even without ice yet, it feels like stepping into a different season. Here, at the deepest point, you see the pit itself, a large, basin-like cavity where ice would be stored in blocks during the cooler months. It was brought in from nearby rivers, sometimes frozen artificially using shallow pools and overnight desert chills. The Persians were nothing if not opportunists about temperature. And here's your mainstream fact, in many towns, communal yakshals were filled and maintained by local guilds or charitable endowments. This was cold for the public good, a kind of icy infrastructure project. Wealthy patrons might fund the construction, but everyone benefited from the shared chill. Your drink. Cooler thanks to a tax-free dome and a clever engineer. Now for something less official, certain stories suggest that yakshals weren't always filled with water turned to ice. Some used salt or even compressed snow brought down from higher elevations on the backs of mules, often packed in straw and sheepskin to keep the journey frosty. Picture that, an ancient Persian snowplow, trudging through scorching terrain with its precious payload. But here's where it gets even sleepier. Historians still argue whether these storage domes were also used for fermenting fruit syrups or chilling ceremonial cloths during religious festivals. There's little consensus. Some point to poetic references, others to patterns of wear on inner ledges. You just yawn and enjoy the mystery. You reach out, run your hand along the curved inner wall of the dome. It's cool and oddly smooth. No decoration. No frills. Just purpose in mud and straw and time. And the design, oh, the design. The dome shape wasn't just aesthetic. It minimized surface area exposed to direct sunlight. Combine that with the strategic north-facing entrance and the thick insulation, and it created a stable microclimate year-round. What you may not have noticed, as you sleepily ambled in, is that these domes were often connected, sometimes directly, sometimes through hidden vents, to the cannet systems we explored earlier. Cold water would be diverted beneath the structure, flowing gently underneath the stored ice, adding even more chill without a single ounce of electricity. And here's a quirky tidbit: in some places, the air inside a yachtshell was so dry and cold that it was rumored to keep meat and dairy products fresh for weeks. Whether this was scientifically sound or just local lore passed down through grandmothers and apricot vendors, no one can quite say. But you can imagine the delight of slicing into a cool wedge of goat cheese in the middle of a 45 degrees Celsius day. For those truly in the know, ice wasn't just for food or drink. It had ceremonial uses. Weddings, births, and even mourning rituals sometimes called for offerings of chilled fruit or ice-cooled rosewater to soothe the senses. In some tales, a bowl of ice might even be placed before an honored guest, both a status symbol and a tiny, glittering miracle in a clay bowl. And on certain nights, when the moon was high and the air hung still, there are whispers of music drifting into the yachtshell dome. Not parties exactly, but processions, or moments of communal gathering during long summer nights. A place to store not only the ice, but a kind of shared coolness in a hot, demanding world. So here you are now, alone in the belly of a 2,000-year-old refrigerator, trying not to bump your head on the low lintel. You exhale, and your breath ghosts in the air. You're beginning to understand that cold, in this world, wasn't just practical. It was poetic. A pause. A sigh. A signal to rest. And just outside, if you climb back up the narrow stone stair, the city will be waiting. The sun climbing. The water jars sweating. The wind catchers turning their unseen faces to the breeze. But for now, down here in the hush, you feel something simpler. The ancient hush of a people who decided that even in the hottest place imaginable, they could craft a space of quiet, clean, sleep-worthy chill. Back above ground, you shield your eyes from the sun as it slides higher over the rooftops of clay and wood. The morning heat begins its slow march, but now you understand what's beneath these streets, these yachtshels, these secret tunnels of chill. You drift through a small bazaar quarter now, where the first vendors are arranging produce and spice mounds, but your nose catches something unexpected. It's syrupy, floral, and faintly sour. A man in an apron is pouring something from a glazed jug into a tall brass goblet packed with shaved ice. He stirs it with the calm confidence of someone who's done this 1,000 times. And with good reason, you're about to meet the earliest ancestor of the slushy. That's right. Welcome to the world of Persian sharbat, a syrupy drink that was equal parts refreshment and ritual. You sip. It's made from sour cherry and rosewater. Your lips pucker. Then relax. Then smile. Sharbat, spelled with a soft sh like the breeze against your tunic, was a staple in ancient Persian hospitality. It wasn't just a drink. It was an art form. You didn't just dump things into a cup. No. You infused, you strained, you chilled. Saffron, lemon, mint, cucumber, hibiscus, quince, even crushed violet petals were fair game. Here's your mainstream fact: by the Achaemenid era, sharbat was already a well-established part of royal banquets and common kitchens alike. Recipes appear in later Arabic and Persian cookbooks, and many were thought to have medicinal properties. Digestive aids, sleep tonics, mood lifters. You sip again. The syrup clings to the sides of the cup like sunset honey. And you notice, it's cold. Chilled. Somehow preserved. The ice may have come from a yachtshell, or perhaps it was made overnight in a shallow basin, a clever trick using evaporative cooling and the sheer audacity of desert nights. Historians still argue whether the earliest sharbats were fermented or not. Some suggest mild alcohol content, others scoff. The truth likely varies with region and recipe. But one thing's clear, sharbat wasn't just about flavor. It was about feeling. Cooling from the inside out. Like someone whispered a lullaby to your internal organs. Now for your quirky tidbit, in the Sasanian period, hosts would sometimes serve sharbat with floating bits of gold leaf or tiny pomegranate seeds carved into floral shapes. Yes, floral shapes. These were people who cooled their drinks with ancient air conditioning and then hand-sculpted fruit. You're starting to understand why Persia was more of a vibe than a place. You wander on, cup in hand, passing shaded porticos where other sleepy citizens sip and gossip. Some are adding a dollop of faluda, a frozen vermicelli dessert steeped in rosewater and lime. Think of it as the ice cream cousin of sharbat, a gentle tangle of textures meant to chill your tongue and slow your thoughts. Nearby, a younger boy pours second javan into another ice-filled bowl. That one's made with vinegar and mint. Yes, vinegar. Don't knock it. The tang hits differently when it's 110 degrees and you've been wearing a wool tunic since dawn. And still, the cold remains. Preserved and passed around like a secret. The city around you becomes more animated, but never hurried. This is not a place that rushes. It flows. The sharbat man laughs with a woman carrying dried limes in her apron. A boy slaps a dusty drum. Someone fans themselves with a palm frond. You take a seat on a low stool and sip again. The chill snakes through your chest and into your fingers. A light breeze tickles your neck. You lean back against the cool brick and feel time slow down. This wasn't just about cooling the drink. It was about cooling the moment. And remember those underground cannets from earlier? Well, clever hosts often buried their jars or goblets in shaded clay pits with a trickle of cool water running nearby. Nature's fridge. If a guest arrived after a long journey, dusty, sun-flattened, parched, they'd be handed a goblet dripping with condensation and tinged with pomegranate or mulberry. In some regions, that was considered a greater honor than gold. In fact, sharbat became such a cultural cornerstone that it traveled. The very word sherbet in English and Turkish, and eventually sorbet in French, comes from this ancient practice. A sleepy little syllable carrying frozen echoes across centuries. Even now, under the beating sun, you feel calmer. You're participating in an unbroken ritual of cooling, of sweetness, of the very human desire to soothe. It's as much emotional as physical. A way to rejoin yourself to the world with grace and sugar and temperature control. As the syrup thickens at the bottom of the cup, you let your eyelids rest. There's still more to explore, but for a moment, your pulse slows. You've just had your first ancient Persian soft drink. No label, no caffeine, no straw. Just a 2,500-year-old recipe, chilled by mud domes and desert moonlight, and sweetened by the collective sighs of a very hot civilization. The sun climbs higher, but oddly, you don't feel it the same way anymore. Maybe it's the sharbat still lingering in your chest like a little icy sigh. Maybe it's the way the narrow alleys of the city bend and wind, casting long shadows that shift and stretch like sleepy cats. Whatever the reason, you feel cool. Centered. Ready to dig deeper. Literally. You follow a mule-drawn cart carrying baskets of glazed jars. The man guiding it hums something tuneless, turning down a sloping alley that ends, oddly, at a garden. Or rather, what looks like a garden at first glance. It's walled, and inside, rows of fruit trees grow, figs, pomegranates, quinces, all strangely green for a desert climate. At the center is a long rectangular pool, gleaming under the late morning sun. Welcome to a Persian paradise garden, or chaharbagh, and you're about to learn why it was much more than just a place to relax, it was an extension of the fridge. Let's start with your mainstream fact. These meticulously designed gardens were found in many Persian estates and cities from as early as the Achaemenid Empire, continuing into the Islamic Golden Age. They weren't just pretty, though they were gorgeous, they were engineered to cool. Carefully laid out with 4 quadrants divided by water channels, hence, chahar bagh, or, 4 gardens, these spaces were designed for evaporative air cooling, much like a yakshal. You step closer to the pool and kneel. The water is barely rippling, shaded by climbing vines. You cup your hands and splash a bit on your face. It's cold. Not, sort of room temp, cold, actually cold. The water has flowed from a shaded cannet pipe, hidden beneath the garden. And here's the quirky detail, the very layout of the garden funnels the wind across the water, carrying cooled air through archways and pavilions. The garden itself becomes a kind of passive air conditioner. There's a young girl plucking sour oranges from a low branch and tossing them into a woven basket. She sees you and points to a shaded stone bench beneath a pergola. You settle there, letting your sandals clack on the cool tile. The air smells of wet stone and mint. There's something otherworldly about sitting in a desert climate and feeling comfortable. Now comes your debate moment. Historians still argue whether the Chahar Bagh was designed primarily for cooling, or whether the cooling was a happy side effect of its symbolic and religious significance. After all, these gardens were designed to represent heaven itself, a theme that passed from Zoroastrian to Islamic culture. But maybe that's the point. Heaven, in Persia, felt like shade, fruit, and a place to sit down. In one corner of the garden, a stone-lined basin has been dug out and partially filled with cool mud and wet straw. This is a fruit storage pit, where ceramic jars are half buried to keep them cool. The man with the cart unloads his sharbat jars and slides them in, covering them with damp burlap. You ask yourself, how did these people, thousands of years before refrigeration, master so many ways to preserve and chill their food? The answer is simple and brilliant: they never fought the desert, they worked with it. They let physics and landscape do the work. Earth stayed cool if shaded. Air moved if directed. Water evaporated and took heat with it. Another detail, along the garden's shaded walls, you spot tall clay amphorae filled with vinegar or sour wine. Their placement isn't random, they sit directly in the cross-current of the garden's breeze, their surfaces sweating, slowly cooling the liquid inside. You realize the entire structure is like a poem to the concept of chill. And, in a sense, you are too. You lean back, letting the garden's rhythm settle over you like a blanket. A woman walks past carrying a small tray of dried fruits, fig, apricot, barberry. She gestures for you to take some. You chew slowly, letting the sour-sweet flavors rehydrate your mouth. Even snacks here were chosen with the desert in mind. Sticky, dense, nourishing. You glance up at the garden's trellis work, where vines snake in and out of carved wood. Small bells hang there, not for music, but to signal wind shifts. It's subtle, but enough for someone who lives here to notice if the breeze is failing or the water needs redirecting. A little meteorological whisper system. And let's not forget the color psychology of this place. The garden tiles are glazed in turquoise and white, reflective tones that bounce the sun away. The ceilings of the pavilions are painted in dark blue, cooling the visual field. Even the sound of running water is part of the experience, calming, hypnotic, giving your brain a break from the harshness of desert life. Another child runs past holding a melon. You blink. Where did that come from? You follow with your eyes and realize that just beyond the garden, tucked into a hillside, is a melon cellar, a deep pit with stacked shelves and a clay-lined lid, designed to keep melons cool for weeks after harvest. Again, no ice. Just brilliant use of terrain. You lean forward and place your hand on the stone bench. It's still cool. The sun is overhead, but you barely feel it. Somehow, you've stumbled into the world's earliest version of central air. And it's working. So you stay. Not because you're tired, or lazy, but because this place demands it. It invites slowness. Just like Sharbat, just like the Yakshal, just like everything these ancient Persians did to stay cool. You breathe in again. Jasmine. Clay. Something herbal. Maybe basil. This isn't just history. This is lifestyle. And you're finally getting the hang of it. You leave the garden slowly, like someone stepping out of a dream and back into dry reality. The air feels hotter now that you've tasted such comfort. But there's a hum in your chest, a little echo of the quiet engineering behind that paradise. You're beginning to see the whole city differently, not just as homes and streets, but as a system for fighting heat, gently and intelligently. Your sandals crunch on gravel as you wander toward the residential quarter. The mud brick walls here are high and windowless, forming a maze of shaded corridors that keep the sun out and the wind funneled in. Above you, wooden latticework screens, mashrabias, jut from upper floors, letting people peer out while blocking the heat. You're walking into the domain of the Persian courtyard home, a marvel of passive cooling architecture. These houses are almost like boxes within boxes, built to beat the desert with silence and symmetry. And you're about to step into one. The wooden door creaks open with a breath of cool air. You're immediately greeted not by a hallway, but a small, dark entry chamber, a thermal buffer called a hashti. This little space is your first defense against the heat outside. Your eyes adjust. Then you turn into a second doorway, and blink. Inside is a courtyard drenched in dappled light, framed by colonnades and hung with vines. A rectangular pool gleams in the center. Sound familiar? This is the residential cousin of the Paradise Garden. And yes, it cools too. Mainstream fact time: traditional Persian homes, especially in arid cities like Yazd, Kashan, and Isfahan, were engineered not just for beauty, but for climate control. Builders knew how to orient the house toward prevailing winds, use thick adobe walls to store coolness, and incorporate wind catchers, or badgers, that acted like natural air conditioners. You spot one now. From the courtyard, you crane your neck and look up, a tall tower with vertical vents, standing like a silent sentinel above the roof. Inside, a clever system of interior vanes channels the wind downward into the home. And here's the quirky detail: some versions even had moist clay or wet charcoal filters, chilling the incoming air through evaporation before it reached the rooms below. You step into a sitting room off the courtyard, where low couches hug the wall and the ceiling is painted with faded celestial patterns. There's a jug of water on the table, beads of condensation glistening on its surface. You sip. It's cool. Again. So how do they keep water cold in the house? Here comes the fringe fact: many homes had a zagir, or underground chamber, lined with glazed brick and often connected to the same Kanat system that fed the public fountains and yakshals. Jars would be lowered into these cool cellars with ropes, then pulled up like secrets from the earth. You look down at your feet. Beneath the rug, there's a trapdoor. Someone, somewhere, knew you'd get thirsty. And now, your scholarly debate moment. Some architects argue that Persian courtyard homes were designed primarily for social modesty and privacy, with the cooling effects as convenient byproducts. Others claim the opposite, that beating the heat was the entire point, and cultural norms just evolved around it. Maybe it's both. Maybe that's the brilliance. Either way, you're in a space where temperature becomes a kind of hospitality. Every breeze, every shadow, is part of the welcome. A woman enters carrying a brass tray with cucumbers and a little bowl of salt. No words. She nods and sets it down. You thank her, take a slice, and suddenly understand why cucumbers were beloved here. They're 96% water and practically grow cold on the vine. Outside the home's shaded embrace, the sun is cooking rooftops like clay pots. But in here, you've got soft cushions, filtered light, and something truly underrated: quiet. It's this contrast, the intensity outside versus the calm within, that makes Persian architecture feel like a lullaby in physical form. You sit back, and for a moment, time becomes syrupy. The air barely moves. Your heartbeat slows. You begin to wonder if staying awake is even worth it. Just before you doze off completely, you hear it, a faint drip drip drip. Somewhere beneath you, water is flowing, coaxed, not forced. Like everything in this ancient system, it's not about domination. It's about coaxing comfort from nature's own rules. Let's not forget the colors, either. Every tile, every plaster detail, every painted arch is done in cooling tones, indigos, teals, whites. Science today backs this up, even visual temperature affects how we perceive our environment. These people knew that millennia ago. Now here's a thought experiment to mull as your eyelids droop. Imagine walking into a house in 500 BCE and finding it cooler than your apartment today. No AC. No wires. Just mud, water, geometry, and wind. That's not just history. That's sorcery in slow motion. You lie back and let the ceiling's painted stars blur above you. The breeze from the badger sighs through the room again. The clay jar of water sweats beside you. And somewhere, down a dark shaft, water flows in its ancient underground course. You think, maybe the best way to chill isn't to resist the heat. Maybe it's to embrace the desert's wisdom, and outsmart it with silence. You eventually rise from the cool sitting room, limbs heavy with comfort, and find your way back into the quiet courtyard. The pool glistens again, its water rippling just slightly in the breeze funneled by the wind catcher. You pause for a moment, absorbing how casually revolutionary all of this is. But there's more to see, and more to chill. You slip through another wooden door, down a narrow corridor, and out onto a bustling street. The sun hits like a wall, but now you know what to look for. You scan rooftops for more badgers, catch the shade-hopping locals in flowing robes and covered heads, and marvel at how the whole city is designed like an organism, its architecture, its water systems, its traditions, all synchronized to preserve coolness. You've made your way to the caravanserai, a massive, walled roadside inn for traders along the silk routes. It looms like a fortress from the outside, but inside, you discover something unexpectedly gentle. Courtyards again. Palm trees again. And that familiar hush, even with camels snorting in their pens and merchants chatting softly over trays of dates. The mainstream fact. Caravanserais were a backbone of commerce across Persia and Central Asia. These rest stops were spaced roughly a day's journey apart, offering shelter, water, food, and a place to sleep for both traders and their animals. But in Persia's hottest regions, many were also engineered for passive cooling, featuring internal water channels, thick insulated walls, vaulted ceilings, and yes, occasionally even a yakshul tucked into a corner. You wander into one of the inner chambers and find a merchant polishing a brass tray. He gestures to a ceramic pot sitting beside him. You lift the lid and, aha, it's sharbat, a sweet, herbal syrup mixed with chilled water, and often served with crushed ice, when available. But how, you ask, did they really keep that pot cool in a caravanserai? Here's your quirky tidbit. Travelers sometimes packed their own small containers of snow from distant mountains, wrapped in straw and cloth, and buried them en route. It wasn't always practical, but for wealthy caravans or royal envoys, it wasn't unheard of to have a little bit of snow survive the trip, especially when stored in clay jars nestled in the heart of a caravanserai's thick walls or buried in its inner cellars. Even without ice, however, these stops use techniques like evaporative cooling, hanging soaked cloths in breezeways, storing water in porous pots that sweat moisture, and locating kitchens and sleeping chambers underground, where the temperature remained more stable. You sip the sharbat, and its cooling blend of mint, rosewater, and something citrusy dances on your tongue. It's soothing. Unapologetically unhurried. And here comes your scholarly squabble of the day. Some argue that Persian caravanserais were primarily defensive structures, way stations for military patrols and tax collection, not just resting points for merchants. Others say they were peaceful hubs of cultural exchange, where languages mixed as easily as spices. The truth, probably, is both. But the architecture? That was built for survival, and comfort, no matter who was staying the night. You pass through one of the sleeping chambers, spare, dark, and cool. Thick rugs are rolled up in a corner. A niche in the wall holds a clay jar with more chilled water. You press your fingers to the jar, feeling the faint dampness on its surface, a reminder of the Zaire principle, using porous clay to cool water via evaporation. It works best in dry climates, and it's thousands of years old. Suddenly, a low bleat. A goat pokes its head in, nosing around for something edible. The merchant chuckles, shooing it away with a gentle word. You realize, this isn't just a stopover. It's a whole ecosystem. As you step back into the courtyard, you notice the stone channels running just beneath the surface, thin slits in the paving where water once flowed from a cistern or underground aqueduct. Maybe they're dry now. Or maybe, in the quiet hours of night, they still gurgle softly under moonlight. Your gaze follows the path of the water toward a small domed structure at the corner of the courtyard. You approach and find a tiled bathhouse, a hammam. Not a luxury spa. A necessity. In Persian cities, even desert towns, the hammam served as a communal center for cleansing and cooling. Water was heated using underground furnaces, and then piped into various chambers of differing temperature. But after the heat, came the chill. You step into the cold room, the sarbana. It's shaded, damp, and smells faintly of stone and soap. A marble bench invites you to rest. You sit. And somehow, despite the day's relentless sun, your skin prickles with a light shiver. These hammams often used cooled water for final rinses, either piped from underground or drawn from deep cisterns that stayed cold even in summer. It wasn't exactly a spa day, but it was refreshingly close. You lean back, letting your body soak in the silence. It's strange, despite all the travel, all the movement, you're not tired in the usual way. You're steeped. Like tea. And maybe that's the whole philosophy here, resist nothing. Use the sun, use the wind, use the water. Don't conquer the climate, dance with it. You eventually step back outside, passing a group of travelers sitting in a shaded alcove, sipping tea and fanning themselves with palm fronds. One offers you a date. You accept it gratefully. Sticky, sweet, and ancient as civilization itself. In a land where daytime heat can break thermometers, they found a way not just to survive, but to cool off in style. No wires. No motors. Just balance. As you leave the caravanserai, you glance back one last time. A pigeon flutters up to perch on a windcatcher's edge. The sky is still blistering. But you're ready for it now. You've learned their secret, cool isn't a temperature. You walk on now, your sandals padded with the dust of the road, the memory of Sharbat lingering faintly on your tongue. The streets begin to widen, and the buildings around you grow grander. This isn't a village anymore, it's a city. A real one. And tonight, it's twilight in ancient Ctesiphon. This place once rivaled Rome in splendor and size. A city of palaces, arcades, pavilions, and bazaars. You pass under the shade of towering archways and over aqueduct-fed canals. Everything glows golden as the sun bows lower, and your skin thanks you for the drop in heat. But make no mistake, it was roasting earlier today. And yet, the people here seemed fine. Unbothered. You wonder how they did it. How an entire urban population, bakers, scribes, soldiers, traders, functioned in a world without air conditioning or even ceiling fans. Turns out, the answer is both clever and kind of hilarious, they didn't work very hard in the afternoon. That's your mainstream fact. In ancient Persia, daily schedules bent around the sun. The morning hours were for labor. Midday was for shade and stillness. Only after sunset did the city truly come alive again. It's a practice still common in parts of the Middle East and Southern Europe today. But back then, it was survival 101. You duck through a set of colonnades, following the sound of music and clinking dishes. A garden opens before you, a royal one, though open to the public during certain festivals. At its center, a central pool of water, framed by pomegranate trees and flowering shrubs. Strings of lanterns bob gently in the evening breeze, catching in the fronds of nearby date palms. The scene is almost too perfect. You reach down and trail your fingers through the surface of the pool. The water is cold. Not brisk. Not tepid. Actually cold. And that, dear traveler, is where things get interesting. You're looking at one of the early uses of reflective cooling surfaces, an idea simple enough to be genius. Many Persian gardens and palaces were designed with shallow, wide water basins that reflected heat away from the Earth's surface, preventing temperature buildup during the day and helping to cool the immediate area as the night air settled in. Here comes your quirky tidbit: in some especially elaborate gardens, Persian engineers even used white marble tiles around these pools to further increase reflectivity. Some of those surfaces got so good at bouncing away solar radiation that people literally used them to keep yogurt from curdling too quickly. That's science, baby. Now, historians don't always agree on whether these garden features were intended to be thermally functional or just beautiful. That's your scholarly debate of the night. Some claim they were built mostly for aesthetic and symbolic purposes, paradise on earth, and all that. Others argue these were early experiments in microclimate engineering, attempts to cool the air without machinery, one shaded leaf at a time. Truth is, it was probably both. And here, that duality just makes it more magical. You sink into the grass, feel the damp of it against your calves. A servant passes by with a tray of sour cherry juice, albaloo, tart and cold, served in fluted glass goblets. You take one, sip, and smile at the weirdness of it all. You're drinking something frosty, surrounded by singing crickets, in a place where summer days easily hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And yet, you're not suffering. A group of children race by, giggling, chased by a lazy dog and one harried nanny. Their feet splash through the edge of the pool, and they shriek with delight. No one yells at them. No one flinches. This is how you grow up in heat. You treat coolness like treasure, not a default setting. Later, a storyteller arrives, sitting cross-legged by a fig tree. His voice is low, steady. He speaks of Khosrow II, the great king who built the famous Tak Kasra, the giant vaulted hall whose ruins still stand today. A hall said to be so well ventilated, you could feel a breeze even when the air outside was dead still. You can almost picture it: high ceilings, open arches, wide courtyards paved in cool stone. The kind of place where heat simply has nowhere to hide. The stars begin to blink into view. Overhead, the night sky stretches like a tapestry, stitched with coolness, embroidered with distant suns. A servant lights an oil lamp near you, and the gentle flicker makes the shadows dance like silent storytellers. You rise slowly, wandering out of the garden and into the narrow alleys that lead to the city's residential quarters. The homes here are compact but intelligent. Clay walls, small high windows, and often, yes, a rooftop sleeping platform. Because here's the final note for tonight: many Persians, especially in cities, slept on their rooftops during the hottest months. You climb a narrow stairwell to the top of one such home and lie back against a worn woven mat. The roof is flat, the stars are out, and the air cool as a sigh. Why rooftop sleeping? Simple thermodynamics. Hot air rises, but in a city, rooftops caught breezes that didn't reach the ground. These sleeping platforms were often slightly raised, with gaps beneath to allow air to circulate. Some even had partial walls to block sand or give privacy. And here's the kicker: families would often bring up clay water pots before bed. Left open overnight, the water would cool via evaporation, ready to offer sips throughout the night. No fridge. No cooler. Just good, old-fashioned patience. You lie still, watching the clouds drift. Somewhere, a flute plays. Somewhere, a yakshal still glows cold in the desert moonlight. You're not home. You're not even in your own time. But you're cool. You're calm. And you're just getting started. The moon has climbed higher now, casting pale light across the flat rooftops of Ctesiphon. You shift slightly on your woven mat, listening to the quiet rhythm of a city half asleep and half awake. Somewhere, a cat knocks over a clay bowl. A baby cries, then is comforted back to sleep. The scent of roasted barley and sun-dried brick still lingers in the warm night air. And now, you're ready to follow the cold again, this time, to the countryside. Out beyond the walls of the city, past the date groves and barley fields, where the stars look a little closer and the desert silence swells. Tonight, you're riding with a group of merchants making their way to the village of Mabad, an ancient settlement famed not only for its pottery but also for an architectural oddity that seems both too simple and too brilliant to be real, the wind catcher. Mainstream fact coming your way: wind catchers, or badgers, were vertical shafts built into homes, granaries, and even ice houses. These structures harnessed even the gentlest breeze, funneled it downward, and distributed cooler air through rooms or subterranean chambers. They've been used across the Middle East for over 1,000 years, and in Iran especially, they were a signature of sophisticated desert architecture. You arrive in Mabad just before dawn. The sky is the color of plums, and the air smells faintly of camel sweat and cardamom. You look up and see them, dozens of wind catchers, rising like sleepy periscopes from earthen rooftops. Some are simple square towers. Others are ornate, octagonal, etched with decorative vents and wooden lattice. Each one whispers the same message: come inside, it's cooler here. You duck into a caravanserai and immediately feel the temperature drop. Not dramatically. Not artificially. Just, gently. Like someone left the door open to a cellar. The wind catcher here rises over 30 feet above your head. Its slotted openings face into the wind, and inside, the air slides smoothly downward. No fans. No wires. Just geometry and gravity doing their quiet duet. Now for your quirky tidbit: some wind catchers were so finely tuned, they could separate dust from the air before it reached the rooms below. Think about that. Not only were they catching wind, they were cleaning it. All before breakfast. The debate here. Historians still argue whether wind catchers were invented independently in different regions or if the knowledge spread via trade routes. Evidence exists of similar systems in Egypt and even ancient Rome, but the Iranian versions are unmatched in complexity. Especially when paired with underground chambers called sardabs, literal cold cellars often linked directly to kanets and yakshals. Some houses had it all. Cold water. Cold air. Cold walls. In a desert. You walk deeper into the building, ducking under low lintels and past thick clay walls. Everything here was designed with temperature in mind. Thermal mass, it's a fancy term, but really just means, let the walls soak up heat in the day and release it slowly at night. The rooms are small but tall. The floors are stone. Even the furniture seems designed to stay cool: woven mats, ceramic stools, and pillows filled with light stuffing that doesn't hold heat. A merchant stirs, rubbing his eyes. He offers you some sour melon, preserved in vinegar and kept in a sealed clay jar near the cool floor. It's shockingly refreshing, and also, let's be honest, a little weird. You chew slowly, your face puckering pleasantly. Later that morning, the caravan continues its journey, heading north. The road winds past smaller villages, all of them dotted with wind catchers of varying sizes. Some squat and crumbling. Others tall and proud. You pass a public ice storage house, half buried in the ground. You peek inside. The air is musty but cool. The ice here, if there is any left, was stored back in winter, protected by thick insulation and a steady draft provided by, you guessed it, a badger. But these towers weren't just used in luxury homes or palaces. That's the beauty of it. Even modest dwellings had one, sometimes cobbled together from mud brick and scrap wood. Cooling, in Persia, wasn't a class privilege. It was a cultural expectation. A birthright. Because survival in this climate required not just grit, but ingenuity. As the sun rises higher, the air begins to bake. You stop at a roadside inn for lunch. The owner greets you with a glass of doze, a tangy, salted yogurt drink mixed with mint and cool water. It's not cold exactly, but it's cool enough. The water used was likely drawn just minutes ago from a shaded cannet access shaft, then mixed in a bowl that had been sitting in the breeze path of the building's wind catcher. And here's a neat trick: some wind catchers were two-way systems. During cooler seasons, they were covered or adjusted to prevent heat loss. During hot seasons, they could be fine-tuned with cloth or shutters to direct airflow more precisely. The ancient Persian version of a thermostat. You sip your dew and glance upward. There's a bird perched on the lip of the wind catcher. It ruffles its feathers, preening, clearly enjoying the steady breeze wafting up from below. A feather flutters down and lands near your foot. You wonder, did the ancient engineers who built these marvels know how deeply their ideas would echo through history? That centuries later, architects would be designing eco-buildings based on their blueprints? Probably not. They were just trying not to sweat through their robes. You finish your drink, thank the innkeeper, and step back into the sun. It's glaring now. The road ahead shimmers like hammered silver. But you're ready for it. Because somewhere up ahead, there's another shaded garden, another underground room, another wind catcher standing sentinel, whispering to the desert wind. Come in. Cool down. Stay a while. You're walking now, the dry soil crunching gently beneath your sandals. The sun is high, but not cruel, not yet. You follow the road north, skirting the rim of the Dasht-e Kavr, the great salt desert. To your left, a stretch of date palms glints green against the pale earth. To your right, a curious shape breaks the monotony of the horizon, a cluster of domes rising from the sand like sleeping elephants. You draw closer. The air seems different here. Not cooler exactly, but calmer. Still. These domes are part of an ancient Persian ice storage facility, built not just with badgers and yakshals, but also with carefully calculated shade and airflow. You run your fingers over the surface of one dome, it's warm to the touch, but the entrance nearby breathes out a gentle, cooler draft. A promise of relief. Inside the main structure, the temperature shifts. It's dark, silent, and smells faintly of damp clay and old earth. The walls curve inward, drawing your eyes upward to the high point of the dome. There's a small opening at the very top, just wide enough to let hot air escape, but not so wide that light can flood in. And this is the key: heat rises, and the ancient Persians knew it. The shape of the dome, the orientation of the vents, the alignment of the building, all of it was engineered to channel heat away while preserving the cool air trapped beneath. You sit on a low stone ledge and let your breathing match the stillness of the space. It's hard to believe this was once packed with ice. But it was. Here's a mainstream fact to soak up: historical records from the Achaemenid and later Sassanid periods mention the use of seasonal labor crews to transport winter ice from higher elevations down to these structures. They'd use insulated carts, often moving at night. It was an operation, fussy, risky, but worth it. The stored ice was used for food preservation, for medicine, and, yes, for royal refreshment. But here's your quirky detail for tonight: some villages had a ceremonial, first melting day. That is, when the stored winter ice had melted enough to signal that summer was officially underway. Children would gather around the yakshal, and the elders would dip ladles into the last of the meltwater and declare it time for warm weather customs, changes in diet, shifts in clothing, even adjustments in prayer timing. You lean back now, listening to the silence of the dome. Outside, the world bakes and glows. But in here, you can almost forget the desert exists. The walls are made of saruj, a kind of ancient waterproof mortar made from lime, ash, egg whites, and goat hair. Yes, really. You wrinkle your nose, imagining the smell when they were mixing it, but the result? Practically immortal insulation. Historians still argue whether these domes were inspired by earlier Egyptian granaries, or perhaps influenced by Babylonian ziggurats in their tiered structure. But the unique convergence of dome, underground chamber, and passive airflow is very distinctly Persian. You step through a smaller side tunnel that links to a kennet-fed chamber. The floor here is damp, and there's a large, sunken basin. It would have once been filled with snow, packed and covered with layers of straw or reeds. Above it, another wind catcher vents out the warmer air. You crouch beside the basin, imagining servants in layered tunics, hurrying with earthenware jars to collect the slowly melting treasure within. Outside again, the air feels sharper now by comparison. The sun has passed its zenith. Time to move on. A passing trader offers you a ride on his donkey cart, a creaky wooden platform laden with ceramics. You climb aboard, brushing dust from your tunic, and the cart lurches forward with a series of bony groans. He tells you stories. In a dialect thick with village inflection, he describes how his grandfather used to stack the ice, layer by layer, wrapped in straw mats. It was a science, he says. No one just threw it in. You had to listen to the cold. You smile at that. Listen to the cold. It sounds like something a poet would say. Or a refrigeration engineer. As you bounce along, the trader offers you a dried apricot, tough but sweet. It's been stored in a jar that sat overnight near the ice dome's cool entrance. Still slightly chilled. You chew slowly, savoring the faint tang against the dry wind in your face. He asks where you're headed. You say, wherever it's cooler. He laughs, and nods at the sky. Then we follow the Cannet, he says. And so you do. The landscape rolls out before you, flat, cracked, but pulsing with invisible rivers beneath your feet. Cannets, badgers, yakshals. These were not luxuries in Persia, they were lifelines. You realize then how much thought went into making the unbearable bearable. Not just enduring the heat, but outsmarting it. With domes. With geometry. With air. And with time. Because you can't rush coolness. You can only invite it, and wait for it to arrive. The donkey cart creaks steadily along the dusty track, and as the Cannet's invisible course leads your path, you start to notice something strange, patches of green. At first it's just a scattering of brush, then an actual grove of trees, tall and slender, whispering to each other in the dry wind. The trader nods proudly and points, water garden. You slide off the cart and walk toward the shade. A shallow channel snakes around the trunks, feeding a central basin where dragonflies hover and small frogs clamber over stones. This, believe it or not, is a Persian chahar bagh, or four-part garden. And yes, the water in that pool. Once chilled by ice stored in a nearby dome. This garden is more than a pretty oasis. It's cosmic architecture. The ancient Persians believed a garden should mirror paradise, a rectangular layout divided by water channels or pathways into four sections, representing the four elements or four rivers of heaven. And if you can keep a garden green in the middle of the desert, you're practically doing divine work. You sit on a low stone bench. There's a subtle coolness here, not because the air is chilly, but because it's calm, buffered by plants, shaded by trees, and scented with damp earth. This is how the elite once entertained guests in summer, beneath mulberry branches, sipping rosewater sherbets cooled with ice carried from mountain snowfields. The drinks would be served in bowls set into marble cradles, and yes, the condensation was part of the show. Here's a more mainstream historical fact: the Persian fondness for iced drinks goes back to at least 500 BCE, with some records noting the use of sweetened snow, flavored with fruit syrups, as an early ancestor to the sorbet. These early ice creams were enjoyed at royal banquets and religious festivals, long before Italy ever churned cream into gelato. But you know what's quirky? Some scholars argue that Persian poets used chilled wine as a double entendre, not just a luxury, but a symbol of emotional restraint. A kind of metaphorical cooling of the passions. Love, in those verses, was best served cold. You look across the pool and notice a narrow spout gently trickling water into the basin. It's powered by gravity alone, no pumps, no motors, just ancient slope science. The channel that feeds this garden is linked to the very same Cannet you've been tracing. That slow-moving underground flow, protected by gravel and patience, is enough to keep an entire garden alive. Enough to chill clay jars. Enough to make ice possible in a desert. Your trader friend joins you, fanning himself with a palm frond. He tells you that his family used to bury ice in clay pots, keeping them just beneath the topsoil of shaded orchards. Even without a yakshal, they could preserve that chill for a day or two. The trick, he says with a wink, was not using it all at once. You smile. Ice as currency. Ice as memory. Ice as something too precious to waste. Now, let's get scholarly again. Historians still argue whether the Persian water gardens were purely aesthetic or if they played a real role in climate modulation. That is, were these spaces actually designed to cool the surrounding air by maximizing evaporative effects and thermal regulation? The answer may be both. When you're surviving in a place where summer means everything might burst into flame, even symbolic cooling helps. You lie back now, watching the sunlight filter through pomegranate leaves. It dances on your skin, but you don't feel scorched. The blend of shade, breeze, and scent has worked its quiet magic. Your limbs grow heavy. And it occurs to you, this wasn't just about comfort. It was about presence. In a world before air conditioning, you had to stay tuned in. To light, to wind, to water. You had to listen to the environment, or risk being defeated by it. The Persians didn't brute force their way through summer, they negotiated with it, like polite but determined diplomats. Your fingers trail through the basin water. It's not icy, but it's cool enough. The frog on the edge doesn't mind your presence. Neither does the dragonfly. You are part of this little engineered paradise now, tucked between clay domes and ancient stones. The trader tells you one last story before he leaves. It's about a wedding that took place in this garden, generations ago. The bride wore blue silk. The groom arrived with a single snowball wrapped in linen, a symbol of both luxury and effort. They placed it in a carved alabaster dish and let it melt during the vows. Their love, the old man says, was measured in moments of coolness. You don't say anything. Just let that image drift like pollen through your sleepy brain. In this place, cooling the body is also cooling the mind. A garden like this isn't built to resist the heat. It's built to remind you that comfort is fleeting, and therefore, worth savoring. The shadows stretch longer across the garden, the sun finally dragging its heels behind the horizon. You rise slowly, joints a little stiff, but spirit lighter. The trader has wandered off, probably to tend his goats or refill his jug, and so you're left to find your own way back. You follow the Kanet's curve once again, but now, something is different. You're not just tracing an engineering marvel. You're walking in rhythm with an ancient logic, a kind of slow, deliberate intelligence that didn't need blueprints or apps, just a deep, quiet partnership with the land. As twilight cools the desert, your thoughts turn to the many people it took to make this watery miracle happen. The builders who braved the shafts. The mathematicians who calculated slopes so fine they made gravity do a whisper's worth of work. The stewards who checked for leaks, patched cracks, and passed on their skills through stories more than scribbles. There's an odd humility in it all. Nobody signs their name on a Kanet. You pass a cluster of small homes now, mud brick and half embedded in the earth. A woman sits in the doorway grinding herbs, and from within comes the sound of children laughing. Their play isn't loud, more like giggles bouncing off walls thick enough to hold in winter heat and keep out summer blaze. The homes here are built with passive cooling in mind, domed roofs to reduce sunlight exposure, small high windows to draw warm air up and out, and thick adobe walls that absorb heat slowly during the day and release it gradually at night. Nothing flashy. Just brilliant in its quiet effectiveness. And remember those wind towers? From earlier on your journey? One pokes out from a roof nearby, turning ever so slightly in the evening breeze. These badgers aren't ornamental, they're still in use. With a couple cloth screens and a splash of water inside, they can chill a room by several degrees without a single spark of electricity. Let's add one more mainstream fact to your growing fan club of ancient Persian cleverness. Modern engineers still study these homes for clues on sustainable design. University researchers from Germany to Japan have built test models mimicking Persian architecture to see how they might cool urban buildings in today's warming cities. Turns out old doesn't mean outdated. But here's the fringe tidbit you didn't expect: in certain older villages, it's said that the placement of cooling spaces followed astrological advice. Local sages would determine where to dig storage pits or place reflective walls based on celestial readings, believing that stars influenced the breath of a house. Practical? Maybe not. But beautiful? Definitely. You take a break beside a carved stone trough where water trickles gently. It's fed by the Kanat, of course, probably for animals, but also for people just like you, pausing at the edge of day. You dip your hands in, splash your face. The water is not icy, but after hours in the sun, it feels perfect. In the silence, you can almost hear the pulse of the system: water gliding under earth, breezes flowing through towers, temperature balancing itself out over hours instead of minutes. This isn't air conditioning, it's air persuasion. Historians still argue whether Persia's innovations in thermal design were fully homegrown or influenced by earlier Mesopotamian, Egyptian, or Indus Valley knowledge. Most likely, it was a gentle borrowing, like a pot of lentils passed between neighbors. You stretch your legs and take one last look at the sky. The stars are gathering now, first a few, then a sprinkle, then a confident sweep of glittering ancestors. Their cool, white light seems to bless the earth with calm. A family nearby lights a single lantern. No harsh bulbs. No buzzing neon. Just the glow of oil and glass. You watch its flame flicker, then disappear behind a woven curtain. And so, as you wander farther from the village, you begin to feel your own body responding to the pace. Your pulse slows. Your breath deepens. Even your thoughts start to curl inward, like smoke finding a chimney. Every cooling method you've seen today has been built on patience. That's the real secret, isn't it? Cooling, in the ancient world, was never about conquering heat. It was about coaxing it. Redirecting it. Respecting its presence, even as you sought relief from it. The Yakshul, the Kanat, the wind tower, the shaded garden, the dome-roofed house, none of these things were accidents. They were born from a long, loving conversation with the land. And somehow, that conversation has reached you, here, across thousands of years. So you find a patch of ground, a little rise covered in soft dust, and settle in. The wind has calmed. The stars lean in. Your body is warm, but not too warm. Somewhere beneath you, the water still flows. The ground beneath you is warm from the day's sun, but it's releasing that heat slowly now, like an oven turned off, still faintly glowing from what it once held. You shift slightly, head cradled in the crook of your arm, and let your mind drift back. You've seen so much. But you're not quite ready to leave. Because there's one more detail, small, easily overlooked, yet quietly revolutionary. A detail not buried in the sands or hidden in royal gardens. It's right there in the pantry. You're about to meet the humble Zerser. The name might not sound thrilling, but Zerser, literally meaning underhead, or more practically, a buried storage cellar, was a genius of passive cooling. Built beneath kitchens, these compact, subterranean rooms served as ancient refrigerators. And while they didn't hum or blink, they kept everything from dairy to pickled lemons cool for days, even weeks. You stir, intrigued. The entrance to one Zerser lies just ahead, a square door set into the floor of a courtyard, shaded by grapevines. You lift the cover carefully, feeling a gust of cooler air rise to greet you. A set of stone steps leads down. You follow. Inside, the air is immediately different. Denser. Damp in a comforting, root cellar kind of way. Clay jars line the walls, some sealed with wax, others wrapped in linen. A few are partially buried, their necks sticking up like startled turtles. You squat beside one and gently lift the lid. Inside. Yogurt, thick and faintly tart, stored in the dark to preserve its culture. You find honey beside it, and beside that, yes, a small bowl of chilled syrup. Probably pomegranate molasses. If this were a feast day, it might be drizzled over shaved ice, or spooned into a sherbet. Here's your mainstream historical fact: the Persians were among the first to use ice mixed with flavorings as a dessert, predating modern sorbet by centuries. This wasn't just luxury, it was seasonal rhythm. You worked with the ice you had, stored in winter, hidden from spring, cherished in summer. You run your hand along the wall. The temperature is naturally regulated by the earth itself. Builders understood that a few meters underground, temperatures remained fairly constant throughout the year. Pair that with a bit of insulation, say, clay and straw, and you've got a room where perishables could sit safely even when the surface was broiling. And here's the quirky tidbit: in some wealthier homes, zercers had ventilation shafts connected to badgers or even canned air tunnels. The result? A trickle of canned-cooled air would drift through, making this space the coolest in the house, literally. Guests were sometimes invited down during scorching afternoons, not for food, but to simply sit and chat. Imagine hosting a tea party in your basement fridge. You pause now, fingers resting on the edge of a ceramic pot. You imagine the generations that passed through this space: grandmothers monitoring fermentation, kids sneaking bites of syrup, fathers calculating how long the last winter ice might last. Cooling wasn't just about physics. It was about choices, traditions, restraint. Historians still argue whether such cellars originated in Persia proper or were borrowed from even older Central Asian or Near Eastern traditions. But there's no denying that the Persian version was refined, adjusted for region and need. One town might favor narrow, deep zercers. Another might dig wide, shallow ones with layered insulation. Above, the night has deepened. You ascend the steps and close the hatch. The world feels gentler somehow, less eager to scorch. Crickets begin their slow, metronomic chorus. You settle onto a clay bench in the courtyard. The vines above rustle faintly in the dark, leaves brushing against one another like dry paper. And here, the final piece of the puzzle starts to click into place. All this time, you've been thinking of cooling as a reaction to heat. But what if, for the ancient Persians, it was a kind of ritual? A way to honor the seasons, to savor the fleeting nature of relief. Cooling wasn't about domination, it was about participation. About moving with the rhythm of the earth instead of against it. The wind picks up for a moment, brushing your cheeks with the faintest whisper of chilled air from the cannet. The bench you're on is warm on one side, cool on the other. Even the night knows balance. One last story reaches your ears from across the courtyard, a whispered tale about a poet who kept a tiny piece of mountain ice in a sealed jar beneath his bed. Not to use. Just to know it was there. A talisman of moderation. Of cool-headedness in a world that often ran hot. You think about that. A secret shard of chill, held in reserve, not to escape life, but to meet it with grace. You exhale. Deeply. Evenly. Everything you've touched today, ice, shade, clay, breeze, it all led to this moment. Not of revelation, but of release. Now, lie back one last time. Let the stars settle above you, twinkling like frost on a midnight window. Let your breath sink with the air around you, soft, steady, cool. Let sleep approach, like a slow drift of wind across ancient stone. The sky remains its deep, infinite blue, punctuated by stars that seem almost to hum. You're not quite asleep yet, and that's okay. There's still one more story to tell, still one more stretch of this journey to walk before the wind down begins. Tonight has been about the slow art of staying cool in a desert empire. But before we let that final breeze lull us to sleep, let's take a curious little detour, into the realm of the royal ice ration. Yes. Ration. Because believe it or not, in certain periods of the Achaemenid and later Sassanid empires, ice was so precious, so carefully guarded, that it could be measured, taxed and, wait for it, gifted diplomatically. You're walking now beside a scribal hall, an airy portico built with wooden beams and glazed tiles. Inside, not scrolls, but ledger tablets, some etched in Elamite, others in Old Persian. You squint, amused by what they show: grain deliveries, wine counts, and right there, ice tallies. Your breath catches. Did the royal kitchen truly receive 3 blocks of stored ice per week, as recorded here? Apparently, yes. And not just the kitchen. Ice was allotted to certain temples, noble estates, and even military outposts in the height of summer. Cooling wasn't just about comfort, it was seen as a kind of favor from the king's own stores. Something akin to giving out gold, or dates, or silk. Here's your mainstream historical fact: in parts of the Persian Empire, especially under Darius I, imperial logistics were shockingly advanced, with records carefully tracking everything from roads to rations. That included commodities that needed preservation. And when the empire spanned climates, from snow-capped Armenian hills to the sandy plains of Susa, you better believe they took advantage of elevation and ice harvesting opportunities. You pause beside a satrap's palace, decorative but simple. A servant carries in a small jar sealed with wax and mud. Inside is ice water, sent down from a nearby mountain station just days ago. The satrap drinks slowly, ceremonially. It's not just hydration. It's authority. A man who drinks cold water when no one else can. That's power. The quirky tidbit? There's a letter, real, preserved on a tablet fragment, describing how one local governor allegedly stole ice meant for a temple feast and used it instead to chill wine for a visiting noble. Scandalous? Perhaps. But deeply human. Even in the ancient world, someone always snuck into the fridge when they weren't supposed to. You let that one settle as you wander into the shaded courtyard of a temple. A brazier burns faintly, not for heat, but to release scent, sandalwood and herbs. You find a priest stirring something in a stone bowl, and realize it's a cold perfume paste, stored in an alabaster jar, meant to soothe the skin and calm the mind. Ice was used not just for food, but for rituals. Historians still argue whether these practices began with the Persians themselves or were adapted from earlier Mesopotamian cooling customs. Some evidence hints at shared temple ice stores in Babylon. Others suggest Persian priests innovated the ritual uses of coolness, especially in their Zoroastrian fire temples, where hot and cold were always in symbolic balance. You sit by the temple wall now, tracing patterns in the dust. A cool wind from the Cannet network rustles your sleeves. You lean your head back against the stone and close your eyes. And a thought comes to you, unbidden but welcome. How many people never saw a glacier, but felt its touch? That single shiver, delivered by hand, block by block, stored by ingenuity, used with reverence. That's the quiet beauty of it. Ice was a luxury, yes. But it was also a connector. Between mountains and valleys. Between kings and villagers. Between past and present. And you, reclining here in the cradle of empire, are a part of that lineage, if only for tonight. One more breeze lifts your hair. One more sigh escapes your lips. You don't need to know the full logistics of how they did it, though you could spend days tracing the routes. All you really need to know is this. A people once sculpted a kingdom from stone, sand, and snow. And they did it not to conquer nature, but to dance with it. You stir a little, just enough to feel the breeze threading past your ear like silk through a loom. You're not walking anymore, you're simply being carried. The earth is quiet, the air is soft, and yet your thoughts float gently onward. We've spent time among kings and engineers, yakshals and cannets. But now it's time to return to ordinary hands. Because while ice was rare and precious, cooling rituals for the common folk were an entirely different kind of art, equal parts practicality and poetry. Tonight, you find yourself in a bustling village near Persepolis, its mud brick homes glowing faintly under the moonlight. You're nestled beside a small communal fountain where children earlier played with clay figurines. Now, silence reigns, broken only by the trickle of water and the rustling of mulberry leaves. It's here that the true rhythm of desert life unfolds, measured not by the grandeur of royal architecture but by daily habits shaped by heat. Mainstream historical fact first: throughout the Persian Empire, rural communities developed elaborate cooling customs that required no ice at all, like sleeping on rooftops, often on dampened woolen mats to catch any hint of night breeze. Families would climb ladders together at dusk, chatting and stargazing before drifting off beneath a blanket of constellations. You climb a rooftop now. An elderly woman waves you over and offers you a spot beside her. The air is cooler up here, moving freely, uninhibited by walls. A ceramic jug, wide-bellied and narrow-necked, rests nearby. She tips it forward slightly and takes a sip of the naturally chilled water inside. It's called a zayriyab jug, and its porous clay allows for constant evaporation, cooling the contents as if by quiet magic. You try it. It tastes faintly of earth and sky. No refrigerator hum. Just physics, patience, and pottery. The quirky tidbit: these jugs were often adorned with miniature paintings or poems, and people would whisper to them while pouring, believing the right words could bless the water with calm or clarity. Superstition, perhaps, but charming, don't you think? Next to the jug lies a bundle of herbs, wrapped in a damp cloth: basil, mint, and a few others you can't name. Common folk use these not just for flavor, but as cooling amulets, worn on the body or placed under pillows. Some even stuffed them inside clay pillows, yes, clay, shaped like horseshoes or crescents and left in the shade during the day to rest one's head on at night. Historians still debate whether such pillows were unique to Persia or borrowed from India or Mesopotamia. But one thing's certain: cooling the body was about more than comfort, it was about survival, dignity, and a sense of ritual. Down below, you hear the faint clinking of glass. Someone is preparing sharbat, a syrupy herbal drink often served with cooled water or even aged vinegar. Flavors like sour cherry, rose, or saffron were common, and not merely for taste. These drinks were believed to help regulate the hot temperament in one's body, part of the ancient medical system that balanced the four humors. You sip a little rose sharbat. It's warm at first, then startlingly cool as it hits the back of your throat. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey brays sleepily, as if agreeing that yes, this is the good stuff. And here's something else, an image you won't soon forget: white cotton sheets hung on village walls and drenched in water during the day, creating impromptu evaporative coolers for the home. People would sit behind them, telling stories and shucking beans, enjoying the damp chill as if seated beside a ghostly waterfall. The scent of fresh mint wafts past again. You realize, not for the first time tonight, that these weren't just hacks. They were culture. Ways of living that turned hardship into elegance. That spun scorching days into slow rituals of resilience. You glance at the stars again. Up here, there's no ceiling. No need for one. Just night and breeze and silence. You let yourself stretch out, feeling the clay tiles still faintly warm beneath you, as if the sun left its memory behind. And perhaps it did. Because every effort to cool is also an effort to remember. To remember winter. To remember patience. To remember that the world, even at its hottest, is capable of gentleness. A soft night wind brushes past, gentle as a breath. You remain still, perhaps now more dream than person, drifting quietly in and out of the warm haze of history. We've journeyed far, but there's one last corridor to pass through before the wind down. And it's not made of stone or clay. No, this one lives in the stories people told, those whispers passed between generations, where cooling wasn't just about temperature, it was about imagination. Tonight, you sit cross-legged near a small fire pit. There's no fire in it, only embers and a faint curl of incense. An elder, bearded, wrapped in robes, voice like gravel soaked in honey, leans close. He's not here to teach or command. He's here to tell you the kind of tale people once shared while the desert cooled and the stars woke up. He begins with something improbable. There was a mountain, not so unusual, but inside that mountain, he says, lived a cold spirit. This spirit gifted certain villages with frost, even in midsummer, so long as they kept the peace, honored the old stories, and never spoke cruelly at sunset. You chuckle. A bedtime fable? Maybe. But you listen. Because here's the truth, many Persian folktales and poems included cooling imagery. The idea of being cooled wasn't just physical, it meant peace, grace, or divine favor. The beloved might have a voice like chilled rosewater. A blessing might arrive on a breeze, colder than the heart of a snow-dwelling jinn. Mainstream historical fact. Even Persian classical poetry, like that of Hafez or Ferdowsi, is peppered with imagery drawn from temperature, especially coldness as a symbol of relief, clarity, or poetic stillness. The word sard, cold, was often paired with inner calm. The elder continues. In one tale, a clever woman tricks a greedy merchant by pretending her house can store ice without a yakshal, because she filled the walls with her own patience. You imagine that. A kind of cooling made from attitude alone. You smile. And then he tells you the story of the girl who married the breeze. She lived in a village that hadn't cooled in many moons. The air was still. The trees limp. The people listless. But every night, she whispered poems to the east wind, until one day it replied, and stayed. Some say they married. Others say she became a breeze herself, visiting homes with tired children and restless goats. The quirky tidbit. In some regions of Iran, folks genuinely left out bowls of rosewater or honey during dry seasons, offering it to the wind spirits. Whether symbolic or sincere, it reflects something timeless, our desire to invite coolness, not command it. Historians still argue whether such customs reflect older Zoroastrian elements, perhaps tied to divine forces of wind and water, or if they were shaped by localized rural beliefs. There's even debate about how far these cooling motifs traveled. Some appear in Central Asian and even North Indian stories, suggesting a shared literary climate, so to speak. As the tale winds down, the elder says nothing more. Just reaches over, pats your shoulder once, and lies back. You lie back too, watching the stars swirl. A shooting star scratches the horizon like a silver thread. You realize something odd. All night, we've talked about cooling as a goal. An achievement. A battle against the sun. But maybe it was never a fight. Maybe the Persians didn't conquer heat. Maybe they befriended it. Made peace with it. Wove it into their days like silk, using clever hands and quiet minds to temper it, not with brute force, but with story, and ritual, and trust in the night. You breathe in. The wind carries hints of ash and mint. You exhale. No sound. And slowly, like the hush before a temple prayer, everything softens. Not ends, just softens. You're almost ready. One more step. One more breath. The sky is vast now. Wider than before. You can't tell if you're lying in a rooftop bed, inside a yakshal's cool dome, or simply cradled somewhere between dream and memory. Time stretches like silk again. You've made it. But before we let go, let's complete the journey, with a quiet thread that ties ancient coolness to the rhythms of today. You're standing, no, drifting, through a narrow bazaar. Not loud, not crowded. Just the gentle murmur of evening trade. The scent of sumac and sesame. The swish of robes, the clack of sandals on stone. Tucked behind a stall, you spot a display of glass jars glinting in lantern light. You wander closer. The vendor, young, friendly, entirely too awake for this hour, holds one up. Inside, preserved lemon slices in syrup, chilled just slightly. She grins. Ancient recipe, she whispers. From a caravan cook who once iced his spices with snow stolen from Mount Damavand. You blink, not sure if you believe her. But she offers you a taste. It's unexpected. Sharp, sweet, and bracing. Like sunlight hidden in cold water. You remember the snow pit. The glazed jars in the yakshal. The desert wind flirting with clay jugs. All those techniques, refined, lost, recovered, adapted. Mainstream fact. Modern Iranian households, especially in rural or off-grid areas, still use traditional cooling tricks. From clay water filters to rooftop sleeping mats, from sharbat with basil seeds to fans woven from palm leaves. Even the architecture of newer homes sometimes honors ancient airflow logic. And quirky detail. In some contemporary Iranian weddings, guests are served a cooling platter, sour cherry sharbat, cucumber slices, crushed ice, and rosewater mists. Not because they need it, but because they remember. They remember a time when cooling took effort. When it was an act of love, of cleverness, of everyday elegance. Historians still puzzle over why the Achaemenids, for all their scrolls and stonework, left so little direct writing on cooling methods. Maybe it was too mundane to record. Or maybe it was simply understood, like how we never write down how to breathe. But the evidence lives on. In ruins. In poems. In the way your skin tingles when wind touches sweat. In every moment someone chose to honor the heat, not flee it. Now, you're walking again, but slower. The world dims around the edges. The stars have softened, fuzzed like candlelight behind silk curtains. You pass a line of yakshals, ghostly white mounds like sleeping beasts. You run your fingers along one. Cold, still. Still serving, centuries later. And just before your eyes finally close, you see a boy, no more than 10, climbing a rope ladder up to his family's rooftop. He carries a clay jug in one hand and a folded mat under his arm. You know what he's about to do. He'll lie down. He'll sip. He'll wait for breeze and sleep. Just like you. So now, let's fade. No need to chase the wind anymore. It has found you. It has cooled you. And it will stay. You're safe now. Let the journey dissolve, gently. Let the images blur like watercolor in a slow rain. The cold domes of the yakshals sink into the earth. The clay jugs dry on the rooftop. The mulberry trees sway without effort, as though even they have fallen asleep. You lie still, completely, perfectly still. Every part of your body has found its place, softened by gravity, cradled by quiet. You are not holding on to any thought. They've all drifted, like desert wine through palm leaves, like rose petals in cooling water. If your breath feels slower, that's good. It means you've settled. You've traveled far tonight, not in distance, but in detail. You've walked across time on sandaled feet. You've traced the outlines of inventions born not from greed, but from care. And care, after all, is what sleep truly is, a way the world tucks you in without needing to say a word. You are resting now in the oldest sense of the word. Not escaping, not forgetting. Just being. Like the snow packed in the pit. Like the syrup in the jar. Still. Cool. Preserved. Whole. The story doesn't need a neat ending. It's already ended, hundreds of years ago, and also not yet. Because in some distant village, someone still cools their water the same way. Someone still tells that same breeze-loving tale. So let that last thought curl through your mind like mist. Let it carry you beyond needing to listen. Let it cool your brow. Sleep well, time traveler.